court will adjudge the defendant guilty of the offense of murder and fix her sentence at life in prison. I cannot imagine the sheer horror these children must have experienced seeing their mother with a gun, seeing their mother pull the trigger, taking their life.
It's official now. Kentucky mom Tiffanie Lucas will potentially spend the rest of her life behind bars after admitting to shooting her children in the head. Lucas, who pleaded guilty to the murders of her two young sons, received life sentences during an emotional court hearing where the boys' family members spoke. We're going to break down the latest from this absolutely devastating story with the prosecutor in this case, as well as a member of the sheriff's office who responded to this crime scene. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. It was incredibly emotional in a Kentucky courtroom on Friday morning, because that is where family members of 6-year-old Maurice Baker Jr. and 9-year-old Jaden Howard delivered powerful victim impact statements ahead of the sentencing of their mother, Tiffanie Lucas, who pleaded guilty last month to killing her young sons back in November of 2023. To be clear about something, though, this 33-year-old didn't take a plea deal. It wasn't like she was offered a plea deal. She pled guilty, but there was no negotiated sentence. She gave up her right to a jury trial. She gave up her right to appeal, and this is the conclusion of the case. But in the end, her sentence would be decided by the judge, Judge Rodney Burris, and he handed down the maximum sentence possible, life in prison for each murder.
A mother is more than the giving of life. It is providing food, clothing, shelter, but more importantly, love and security. I cannot imagine the sheer horror these children must have experienced seeing their mother with a gun. The sheer horror that second child had as he heard the discharge of that weapon for the first child. And maybe even both of them seeing their mother pull the trigger, taking their life. As to count one, the court will adjudge the defendant guilty of the offense of murder and fix her sentence at life in prison. On count two, the court will adjudge the defendant guilty of the offense of murder and fix her sentence at life in prison.
Hey, by the way, I just want to take a quick minute to thank Upside for sponsoring this episode of Sidebar, and also because they have a special Black Friday promotion. Now, if you don't know what Upside is, it's great. It is a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries, food. So when I pump my gas now or go for lunch, I can potentially use the free Upside app to get cash back. This is real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you transfer right into your bank account. So once you have the Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying, you pay as usual using your debit or credit card, you follow the steps on the app, and you get paid. And you can use Upside at all different kinds of places: Shell, Mobile, 7-Eleven, Taco Bell. And here is the Black Friday kicker that I mentioned. If you download Upside right now by clicking the link in the description and you use our code BF10, you get a $10 bonus on your first purchase. This is a Black Friday special, one time only, $10 cash back bonus on your first purchase with our special code BF10. Now, you might be thinking, because of the sheer horror of this crime, that there's no way Tiffanie Lucas could be eligible for parole in any way, right? Well, apparently, according to Kentucky Commonwealth law, that is not the case.
Kentucky's method of incarceration for felony offenses is what's referred to as indeterminate sentencing. It can be somewhat difficult to follow if you don't deal with it every day. But ultimately, the court has to assume that the components of the judicial system, which includes the executive branch's parole board, will be followed to the laws.
So yeah, Kentucky Commonwealth law actually allows parole eligibility even for a crime like this. I know. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. I'm going to dive into this a little bit more, but I'm not going to do it alone. I had the opportunity to sit down with two special guests in this case. Colonel Alex Payne of the Bullitt County Sheriff's Office initially responded to this crime when it happened. We interviewed him, I think, right after this story broke. And also Bullitt County Prosecutor Bailey Taylor, so the prosecutor in this case. And you're going to be hearing from both of them as I go through this story. So Bailey, first of all, thanks so much for coming back on. It's great to see you. I want to start with the sentencing. What were your general thoughts as the sentencing was happening? Was this what you and your team were expecting?
Yes, it was. We were thinking that at the very least he would give the maximum sentence in terms of years, which would be 70, or he would sentence her to life without the possibility of parole for 20 years.
And let's talk about that, Bailey. Could she really get parole? How does it work?
Well, she, by Kentucky law, would appear before the parole board after she has served 20 years. At that time, the parole board could parole her. They could also defer to a later date, or they could simply order a serve out.
What are the chances that she would make parole?
Well, as I told a couple of the local stations, I think her chances of making parole are somewhere between slim and none.
And that's because the gravity of these crimes, right?
Yes.
Bailey, how's the family doing?
Well, there's two families involved because the children had different fathers. They are taking it very hard. It was a very, very traumatic experience. The concern that they had to a large degree was the fact that by Kentucky law, she would come up for parole. And I've tried to reassure them that chance of her getting paroled is very, very unlikely.
So I actually want to take a step back and I want to go through the story here, the tragic events that led to Tiffanie Lucas's arrest back on November 8th, 2023, because that is when police responded to a shooting call in this quiet residential area in Kentucky's Bullitt County. A neighbor told police that he pulls into his driveway and what does he see? Tiffanie Lucas walking down the steps of the porch telling him that her kids were dying before she collapses in his driveway. So this neighbor runs into her home, attempts to save the boys, sees this horrific scene, calls 911. The children are rushed to a hospital, but they die. Body cam footage revealed Lucas in this kind of state of distress, crying face down in the driveway. An officer can be heard trying to ask her questions, but she remains largely silent, only occasionally murmuring or sobbing. Later on in the footage, Lucas was transported to the sheriff's office for questioning, where she told investigators that she had apparently shot herself in the ear, but there were no visible wounds that were ever found. Colonel Payne, good to see you again. Thanks so much for coming back here on Sidebar. You know, you investigated this from the very beginning. We had you on a previous episode of Sidebar. I think we actually spoke when this story first broke. Now that this has come to a close, what are your thoughts on this?
Relief. I guess number one, glad it's over. It's been tough on this community. It's been tough on this department. It's been tough on everyone involved. And so I guess there's this big overall feeling of relief. I guess that's how I would put it.
By the way, I don't know this. Were you in the courtroom when she was sentenced?
No, I had really no inclination to go over there. I really didn't want to see her again. It was very emotional in there. Of course, I'm just right across the street. I'm in walking distance from it. And the guys that we had there, and of course, security we had was pretty heavy, obviously, for something of this nature that's that emotionally charged. And it was an emotionally charged courtroom. But I'm glad the process didn't go as long as it could have. With the her basically pleading guilty and then just leaving it up to the judge for sentencing, that basically sped things up a whole lot.
Colonel, we talked about this, that there was evidence that she suggested she might have shot herself in the ear, but there was no evidence to support that. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Do you think there was ever a plan for her to take her own life?
No, we didn't. Well, I say no. It's just like pretty much what you said. There was no evidence to support that allegation. So, that's unless there was something there that literally pointed, to that happening. You know how it is in this line of work. We're not going to say that that occurred if we can't put our finger on something that absolutely tells us that it did. And in this case, there wasn't anything.
Any idea on why she said that?
It'd be pure speculation if I had any reply to it, but I don't know. I have no idea.
So prior to the sentence, family members addressed Tiffanie Lucas, and as you can imagine, they had some pretty harsh words for her.
I want you to suffer just like I'm suffering right now. You have hurt so many people, Tiffany. I don't have nothing else to say. She just knows, she knows. She done ripped us apart.
You became what children their age fear the most, a monster. Not for 1 minute do I believe, like you said, you were in a hard spot. You had support in so many ways that you could have used. I will never forgive you. I hope every day you close your eyes that they haunt you, but I don't. You don't deserve to see them, and they shouldn't see you. I'll be there at every parole hearing. Do you hear me? I'll be there at every parole hearing.
Now, Lucas's defense team argued that she had been suffering from a psychotic disorder that caused her to snap. They tried to paint a picture of a woman who was overwhelmed by mental illness, that she was not in control of her actions. The victim's family members, though, could not contain their disbelief at such a suggestion.
Tiffanie Lucas was a devoted mother who showed her love for her children.
Folks, this is a court of law. Outbursts will not be tolerated. Now, if you cannot maintain your composure while the other side presents their argument, I'm going to ask you to leave now. I don't want to hold anybody in contempt. That's not what needs to happen at this point.
And Bailey, you were in the courtroom when this outburst happened. Can you describe for us your reaction to that, the sheer grief and pain that these family members were in as they had to, again, kind of relive this tragedy all over again?
Well, it is obviously upsetting. You can see it by watching the full video, particularly the grandmother, the aunts, and the one father, Maurice Sr., have all been terribly traumatized by this situation. I gave them the option to either provide a written victim impact statement to the court, or if they chose, they could address the court directly. And 7 of the victims, which is pretty much all of them, are representing the families, all chose to do that.
Bailey, what stood out to you about those statements?
Well, it's obvious they all believed, and I have no reason to doubt them, that the family would have provided services either to Tiffanie or would have taken care of the children when Tiffanie was having trouble dealing with them, and they were unable to do that.
Bailey, what can you tell us about Tiffanie Lucas' reaction, her demeanor in that courtroom when this was all going on?
To be honest with you, I never actually looked over at her during the testimony.
Wow.
What I saw from some of the coverage was that at some points she was upset, slid down in her chair and wiped her eyes. And a couple of the victims said during the statement that she was crying.
Also, I have to tell you, as part of the defense's argument, they showed this video footage that was recorded the day before the shooting. And in one clip, Lucas is seen speaking to a neighbor on the morning of November 7th, 2023, during what the defense described as a mental health episode. Her behavior appeared to be erratic, as she reportedly told a neighbor that she was in distress, needing help. The video suggested that Lucas may have been struggling with her mental state in the days leading up to this tragedy. And then it was weird because there's also this video of her and the kids at a Waffle House, and she appears happy. Let me ask you this. After investigating this case, after it's now been concluded, any idea on why Tiffanie Lucas did this to her children?
I'll be quite honest with you. I think there's evil in this world. And Tiffanie Lucas embodies that. And maybe I'm just being simplistic, but that's what I believe.
Colonel, what are your thoughts on that video of Lucas at the neighbor's house and the Waffle House? Because the defense's argument was that she was suffering from mental illness and drugs. What was your take on those videos of her?
I really don't have an opinion on them. I mean, she carried on business as usual, it appeared to me. But they don't do anything as far as, in my mind, to give her any leeway into what she did. And, whether it was drugs, whatever it was, mental illness, combination of both, it takes an evil individual to kill your own children.
Colonel, is there anything you could tell us about her mental health history, her drug history, just so we have a better understanding?
As far as we're aware, there's really no mental health history that she has. This was she wasn't, as you hear a lot of times in this line of work, she wasn't a frequent flyer with us. This was totally out of the blue. Usually people that, are suffering from some type of mental illness, we, law enforcement, will have dealt with them. Some we even become very familiar with. She was not that person. And so the first time we interacted with her, that's what she did.
By the way, back in September, Lucas's case took a really interesting legal turn because she informed the court that she was originally going to be pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. Now, to be clear about that, she wasn't going to argue that she didn't commit the shooting, but rather she couldn't be held legally responsible for the crime because she was not sane at the time. And Lucas, by the way, did make very bizarre statements to the police when this happened. She claimed that she was manipulated by Facebook and the internet. She also told police that the gun that was used was given to her by someone else, maybe that it was just went off or something. It was odd. Colonel, your team was investigating this case, and those odd statements that she made about Wi-Fi and the internet and where she got the gun, what do you take away from all that?
It's not anything that we haven't really heard before, in other cases. If people want to find reasons, to do what they do, whether they're looking for justification or they're just trying to actually, give you some insight into what they're thinking. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. She killed her own children, period.
Colonel, what effect has this case had on your office? What effect has this had on the community?
It's been tough. I mean, this is really we deal with a lot of things, but the toughest things we deal with in this line of work are things that deal with children, the most innocent, I would say, of our population. And so when you have something this heinous, this violent, it hits hard. And it's taken a while for people to begin to cope, to get better. As I said, that courtroom was very emotionally charged. It affects a ton of people, but this is a close-knit community. The community did pull together. We worked very well with our partners. I'd give a shout out to our Commonwealth Attorney's Office, who did an outstanding job of working with us to prosecute this case, because once we put that case together, it goes to their hands. And I think they did a yeoman's job in the time they had and put this thing together to come to this end.
Bailey, when you go back and you look at that, her team was intending at one point in time to use this insanity defense. What was your take on that?
Well, I believe that as they're being charged as her attorneys, had to reasonably explore every avenue they had to competently defend her. And I think they made the call that the best way, and of course, don't intend to speak for them, but my feeling is that they determined that the best way was to make an open plea and not extend the case out any further than necessary.
But then, in a change of heart, and of course the reason we're here today is because Tiffanie Lucas later decided to plead guilty to 2 counts of murder on what is known as an open plea. I mentioned this before. Basically, she didn't make any kind of deal with the prosecutors. It wasn't like a deal was offered to her. And instead, she left her fate, her sentence, solely up to the judge. Bailey, I wanted to ask you about this, that the last time we spoke to you, you told us about her decision to enter this open plea. And now that it's all said and done, do you think ultimately that was the best decision in what is a horrible case? Is there any other way that this could have played out realistically?
Well, I think as we talked about a little bit before, we could have filed notice to present aggravating circumstances and seek a harsher sentence. But the problem with that is that the judge has to determine whether or not they are in fact aggravating circumstances. We cannot just simply submit why we believe they're aggravating circumstances. The judge has to rule on that. So he may and he may not, depending on the evidence that was produced by the defendant and her team. So I believe that we resolved this case in almost a year, which is very, very quick, but we ended up with a life sentence. So I think based under the circumstances, it was a very fair and just adjudication of the matter, and it was very efficiently handled.
Are you relieved that this didn't have to go to trial?
Yes, because as we talked about before, I think that there were issues involving her, not only her mental state at the time, but her past history. And I think we would not have had any trouble getting an actual conviction. Where I think we would have had some risk was during the sentencing phase if we got jurors that were sympathetic to not only her current plight, but her past history. And at that point, the range of punishment was 20 years to life. So, I mean, conceivably, not totally likely, but conceivably, she could have gotten 20 to 40 years.
Bailey, has she ever admitted exactly what happened that day?
When she was placed under oath by Judge Burris and told to, or not told, but asked whether or not she was guilty, the indictment states that she shot both children. So she did admit it, but I don't think she's ever described it in any detail, at least in open court.
Will there be any efforts to try to speak with her while she's behind bars?
I don't believe so.
From there, Tiffanie Lucas was transported to a detention center immediately after the hearing, where she will now serve out her life sentence. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.